journey to discuss the criminal trial aspect of the matter. I would just like to share some introductory thoughts. Negotiable Instruments Act, as everyone knows, was enacted to characterize and define the law relating to authoritative records like promissory notes, bills of exchange, checks, etc. Now, in the business circles, there was a big problem that the checks were given, post-dated checks were given, and they were dishonored. Civil suits, as everyone knows, takes years, decades, whatever you can say, decades to be decided. Though, of course, with Section 37 of the CPC and summary suits, the disposal is expectedly to be faster. But in order to introduce confidence in the business circles, Chapter 17 was introduced in the Negotiable Instrument Act, and the provisions of sections 138 to 142 were enacted initially for criminalizing the dishonor of a check. Before that, it was no criminal action was permissible for dishonor of a check. Anyhow, with the introduction of these provisions, the dishonor of a check has been now defined as an offense, punishable with imprisonment of up to 2 years. Now, before discussing what the procedure pertaining to the dishonor of checks is, we would just like to refer to certain definitions which keep on cropping up. First, it is drawer and the drawee. Now, what is the difference? These words keep on cropping up. I'll just let you know the brief difference between the drawer, drawee, and the payee. In case of the check payment, the person who has a bank account and draws writes a check is the drawer, and his bank is the drawee, and the person to whom it is payable is the payee. So that is the broad difference between the drawer and the drawee. Holder of a check in due course. These definitions are there in Section 7 of the Negotiable Instrument Act. Holder of, and Section 8 is holder of the check. The holder of a promissory note, a bill of exchange, or a check means any person entitled in his own name to the possession thereof and to receive and recover the amount due therefrom the parties thereto. Holder in due course, as is defined in Section 9, means any person who for consideration. Now, this word consideration is very important. It will again be coming up when we deal with Section 138. Became the possessor of a promissory note, bill of exchange, or check if payable to the bearer. So these are the definitions which we will be required to consider when we are dealing with the penal parts of Section 138. Now, Section 138, Chapter 17 of the Negotiable Instruments Act, which was introduced, as I said, in the year 1988 by Act number 66 of 1988. It made the offenses, the act of dishonor of a check, to be a criminal offense. Now, the bare section I need not repeat for the simple reason that it will be very time consuming, but a very important amendment which was brought around, which is now also may create confusion sometimes, is that the proviso to the Section 138 reads that the check has been presented to the bank within a period of 6 months from the date on which it is drawn, or within the period of its validity, whichever is earlier. Now, this 6 months has been reduced to 3 months by a Reserve Bank of India notification in the year 2012 with effect from 1st April 2012. So now the date of validity of the check is only 3 months. So this is a very important thing which every law student and a lawyer has to take note of. Now, what is the procedure when there is a dishonor of a check? We just explain it in the form of a flow chart. Firstly, when the holder of a check in due course presents the check in his bank account, his or her bank account, and receives the intimation from the bank that the check has been dishonored. The reasons may be different. There may be a number of reasons. We will discuss those reasons with the Supreme Court judgments on the issue at a later point of time. But once an intimation is received regarding the check not having been honored, the holder has to issue a notice to the drawee regarding intimating him that the check has been dishonored and that he should make good the money of the check. The legal notice is to be issued within 30 days from receiving the intimation. 15 days is the notice period for making payment of the amount of the dishonored check. If payment is not made within 15 days of the receipt of the notice of dishonor of check, a criminal complaint can be filed within 30 days of the expiry of the notice period. So that is the period, precisely 30 days from the date of intimation of the dishonor of the check, the notice has to be issued. The notice period is 15 days. And if the payment is not made within 15 days, then within 30 days thereafter, the complaint has to be filed. Now, sometimes it may happen that the complainant or the holder of the check in due course is unable to present the complaint within that period of 30 days. For that purpose, the Act has been introduced, has been amended with the proviso being appended to the section 142 of the Act, which says that the cognizance of a complaint may be taken by the court after the prescribed period if the complainant satisfies the court that he had sufficient cause for not making a complaint within such period. Before this amendment, there was absolutely no way for the complainant to get condonation of delay in filing of the complaint. The general provisions of CRPC are not applicable to this Act, and therefore the complainant was left helpless. But now, with the introduction of the proviso, there is a power with the court to condone the delay occasioned in filing of the complaint. Now, once the complaint is filed before the court, it is made over to the magistrate having appropriate jurisdiction. We will, of course, discuss the issue of jurisdiction where the complaint can be filed at a later point of time. That's another interesting aspect of the entire controversy. The court to whom the complaint is filed may hear the case on the same date regarding the maintainability, the limitation, etc. The Act permits. Now, since it is a complaint case, everybody, I suppose my friends are all aware regarding the difference in procedure between the complaint cases and the cases instituted on police report. In a complaint case, before cognizance is taken, the complainant has to lead his evidence. For that purpose, section 145 of the Act provides that evidence of the complainant can be taken on an affidavit. So what the complainant has to do is, he has to swear his affidavit for at the pre-cognizance stage. That affidavit will be treated to be the evidence in support of the complaint, section 200 CRPC, 200 and 202 CRPC, that would be the evidence. In addition to the complainant, any other witness which the complainant desires to get examined, he or she also can be, he also can file the affidavit. Now, after the complainant files the affidavit, the court considers the matter for summoning of the accused. On being prima facie satisfied that the complaint and the evidence led in support thereof, do provide sufficient grounds to proceed against the accused, the court shall pass an order summoning the accused to face trial under the provisions of the NI Act. Now, once the accused puts in appearance, then he shall be read over the accusation of the offense. This is another important aspect of the matter, that the case is to be tried in a summary manner, and therefore there is no formal charge in a case under the Negotiable Instrument Act. It is only the accusation which has to be read over. Many a times the lawyers, the defense confuses these cases with warrant trial cases and try to argue the cases on charge. Now, dear friends, make it clear and try to understand that in cases under the NI Act, there is no requirement for the court to hear the accused on the question of charge, because the case is to be tried as a summary trial, and as per section 251 of the CRPC, only the accusation is to be read out. Now, many a times the accused may have a grievance that if I'm heard at that stage, probably the case might not proceed. I have a very strong defense. But well, CRPC does not recognize the right of the accused to be heard at the stage when the accusation is to be read out. Now, what is the remedy for the accused in that situation? Of course, our law does not leave anyone without a remedy. The only remedy, if you have a very strong ground that to show that the complaint even is not fit to be entertained, or it should be thrown out at the inception, then the proper way would be to take recourse of proceedings under section 482 CRPC by filing a petition before the High Court. Otherwise, the trial court is under an obligation to read over the accusation of the offences. Once cognizance has been taken and the accused has put in appearance, the only answer is that the accusation has to be read out, and the person, the accused, who has a grievance against such accusation can challenge the same before the High Court by filing a petition under section 482 CRPC. One more, just a procedural thing, that once an accused appears in the court, the offense under the Negotiable Instrument Act is non-cognizable and bailable. Therefore, he has to be released on bail. The accused, after appearance, has a right to receive copies of all the documents which the complainant has filed. Once the copies have been supplied, the accusation is read over. If the accused pleads guilty, there may be cases wherein a defense lawyer may advise the accused that you don't have a case to plead guilty. In that event, the court will proceed to convict the accused and hear him on the aspect of sentences. If the accused pleads not guilty to the accusation, then the trial will be commenced. The date would be given for completion of evidence of the complainant. The complainant, now there is a very small technical and a very important thing to be kept in mind by the complainant's lawyers. Many times what happens is that in the pre-cognizance stage, you have filed affidavit on the basis whereof the accused has been summoned. Now the documents are there. What would be the documents? The documents would be the original check, the return memo issued by the bank, the notice which has been issued to the accused under section 138 of the NI Act, and the reply forwarded by the accused. These documents have to be filed in original. Once the evidence of the complainant commences, since there is no requirement of formal examination in chief, oral examination in chief, and the affidavit itself can be considered to be the examination in chief of the complainant, the complainant's lawyer has to be conscious of the fact that he should mark exhibits on the documents. Unexhibited documents might not be considered at a later stage, or else you would have to file an application for needing additional evidence. So be careful at that stage and file your get the documents exhibited when the complainant's evidence commences. After the accusation has been read over, the documents must be exhibited. Then the witnesses of the complainant are examined, the evidence is completed. If from the evidence of the complainant and the documents which have been proved on record, the court is satisfied that there are incriminating circumstances against the accused, then he will be questioned under section 313 CRPC. Why I made this observation? There is a reason behind it. There may be cases where there is nothing in the complainant's evidence which can tend to incriminate the accused. Say a given case, the check is signed by X person, and by mistake, it often happens in the cases of companies and firms. The check is signed by one director, and instead of making him to be an accused, somebody else is given the notice and the complaint is filed against him. This check is signed by X and the complaint is filed against Y. In that case, the court may hold that there is no material on the record which requires putting the accused to questioning under section 313 CRPC, and the court would have the power to outright acquit the accused without putting in these circumstances in his statements under section 313 CRPC. So that is the statement of the accused. Thereafter, the accused is given opportunity to lead defense. Arguments are heard and judgment is pronounced. In case the judgment is one of conviction, the accused has a right to file an appeal to the Court of Sessions. In case the judgment is one of acquittal, the complainant has to approach the High Court by filing an application for special leave to appeal under section 378(4) CRPC. He cannot file a victim's appeal under section 372 CRPC. This has to be kept in mind. It happens many a times that the lawyer inadvertently or unknowingly advises the complainant that you can file an appeal against judgment of acquittal in the sessions court itself by resorting to provisions under section 372 CRPC. The sessions judge finally would reject the appeal, holding it to be not maintainable, and by that time the limitation for filing an application for leave to appeal in the High Court would have run out. So be careful on that aspect. So these are the general steps of trial. Now, before coming to the various issues which arise, I'll again arise in the trial under the NI Act. I'll again summarize the ingredients required for complying with section 138, because that is the crux of the entire prosecution. A person must have drawn a check for payment of money to another for the discharge of any debt or other liability. So the check must have been drawn by the drawee and handed over to the payee for discharge of any debt or other liability. Now, this issue of debt or other liability has been deliberated in numerous cases over the decades for which this NI Act, chapter 18 and 17 has been enforced, and there are number of judgments on the issue. A few recent judgments I will be discussing a little later. The check must be presented to the bank within a period of 3 months. That the check is returned by the bank unpaid, either because of insufficient funds or that it exceeds the amount arranged to be paid from that account by an agreement made with the bank. The dishonor may be for a reason that the signatures differ. The dishonor may be for the reason that the account is closed. There are n number of reasons. The payee makes a demand for payment of the money by giving a notice in writing to the drawer within 15 days of the receipt of information by him from the bank regarding return of the check as unpaid, and the drawer fails to make payment to the payee within 15 days of the receipt of the notice. So supposing the notice is issued and the drawer makes over the payment of the amount, then ingredients of the offense are not made out and no complaint can be filed. This is the general discussion regarding the procedure. Now, what was happening in the NI Act matters was that the cases were long drawn out, the complainants were suffering. So the legislature thought of a way how to ameliorate the pain of the complainant to some extent at the initial stage. So the Negotiable Instrument Act, Amendment Act 2018 was introduced in that. It came into effect from September 1, 2018, allowing the court trying an offense related to the check bouncing to direct that the drawer shall pay interim compensation not exceeding 20% of the check amount to the complainant within 60 days of the trial court's order. The compensation may be paid either in a summary trial or a summons case where the drawer pleads not guilty to the accusation made in the complaint or upon the reading out of the after the reading out of the accusation. The amendment also empowers the appellate court hearing appeals against conviction to direct appellant to deposit a minimum 20% of the fine / compensation awarded in addition to the interim compensation. So these are the two reliefs which have been provided to the complainant by virtue of section 143 of the Act and section 148 of the Act. That by section 143A, the trial court has been empowered to grant compensation, interim compensation to the tune of 20% of the check amount. And once the case has resulted into a conviction, then the appellate court has the power to impose a further compensation or fine to the tune of 20%, and the accused would be under an obligation to pay the same. This was necessitated, my dear friends, because it was happening in a large number of cases that the courts were ordering for compensation, and the matters were carried to the High Court saying that the appellate court cannot impose such a condition while granting bail in an appeal because it amounts to denial of opportunity to contest the appeal. Now with this amendment, the issue has been laid to rest. These amendments have been held to be retrospective in effect. Very interestingly, the challenge was given to this amendment that whether the section 148 of the NI Act would apply to the cases which have been decided before the amendment was brought in. And Honorable Supreme Court in the case of Surinder Singh Deswal held that section 148 of the NI Act is applicable retrospectively. So these are generally the principles under the NI Act. Now, what are the issues which can arise in a trial under the NI Act? A very important issue which is for which we need not go to any Supreme Court judgment. There is a great deal of confusion that supposing it is a blank check, the drawee signs a check, leaves the other columns blank and hands it over to the payee. Whether the payee is entitled or authorized to fill in the blanks and present it in his account, and if by doing so, whether he's making interpolations in the check or not. For that purpose, I would request all my dear friends to refer to section 118 of the Negotiable Instrument Act. Now, there are presumptions under chapter 17 as well, but those presumptions we'll discuss later. But these are very interesting presumptions which everyone must keep in mind while dealing with cases under the NI Act. Supposing a client comes to you having a check in his hand which is blank except signatures of the drawee. Now, what your advice would be? For that purpose, section 118 needs to be looked at. It reads, presumptions as to negotiable instruments. Until the contrary is proved, the following presumptions shall be made. A, of consideration, that every negotiable instrument was made or drawn for consideration, and that every such instrument, when it has been accepted, endorsed, negotiated, or transferred, was accepted, endorsed, negotiated, or transferred for consideration. So there is a presumption regarding the Negotiable Instrument Act having been made or drawn for consideration. As to the date, that is B, that every negotiable instrument bearing a date was made or drawn on such date. Then for the purpose of our discussion, section E is relevant as to the endorsements, that the endorsements appearing upon a negotiable instrument were made in the order in which they appear then on. And G says the holder is a holder in due course. So it's very clear, my friends, that if the holder is provided a blank check, then he is given an authority to put in the date, to put in the figures, and present the check in his or his account, or he can even endorse it to someone else. The issue, of course, would arise that the presumption then would be rebuttable, that whether the endorsement is proper or not. Now, the other presumption which is provided under the Act is section 139 of the Act, which says it shall be presumed, unless the contrary is proved, that the holder of a check received the check of the nature referred to in section 138 for the discharge in whole or in part of any debt or other liability. So now if you read this provision in conjunction with section 118, it would become clear that the holder has a presumption in his favor that the check was issued on the date which is written thereupon, that the check was issued for the amount which is written thereupon, and that the check was issued in the name of the payee whose name appears thereupon. Now, section 140 goes a step further and says that it shall not be a defense in a prosecution for an offense under section 138 of the NI Act that the drawer had no reason to believe when he issued the check that the check may be dishonored on presentment for the reason stated in that section. So this is not a defense available to the drawee. One important provision which for the present I'll just refer to shortly is regarding offenses against the companies. Many times complaints are filed against companies and its directors. Now section 141 of the NI Act, it says if the person committing an offense under section 138 is a company, every person who at the time the offense was committed was in charge of and was responsible to the company for the conduct of the business of the company as well as the company shall be deemed to be guilty of the offense and shall be liable to be proceeded against and punished accordingly. It means that even the directors, all the directors of the company, even though they are not signatories to the check, they can be prosecuted and they can be punished. But then the complainant or the holder in due course has to prove that the person so implicated, so arraigned in the complaint is or was responsible for the day-to-day affairs of the company. For the purposes of filing a complaint against the company for dishonor of check issued in the name of the company, it is essential that the company must be implicated as an accused, arraigned as an accused in the complaint. It's very important and a vital thing. It happens, this mistake is made very frequently, that while filing the complaint, the lawyers tend to arraign only the directors. They leave out the company. The famous judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court in this regard is Anita Hada's case, and a recent judgment reported in AIR 2019 Supreme Court, Himanshu, AIR 2019 Supreme Court 3052, which says that unless the company is arraigned, the director cannot be punished or prosecuted in a complaint under the Negotiable Instrument Act. Now I'm looking at some queries cropping up. I'll be coming to those, but before that, a very significant dispute which is raised and applications which are filed in cases under the NI Act before the trial court. I have come across frequent such applications wherein the accused files an application. Sir, I just gave a blank check to X and these endorsements are not in my handwriting, so get the check compared. Now, well, compared through the FSL, the matters are dragged on for years and years together. Dear friends, make it clear in your mind, section 118, which I referred to, is enough to satisfy the court that there is no requirement, there is no such hurdle on the right of the complainant to fill in the blanks in the check, and simply because the check has been filled in by some person other than the drawee, there cannot be any demand for sending the check to the forensic science laboratory for comparison. In the same line, there may be a dispute. The drawee may be having a grievance that the check does not bear his signature. What happens in that circumstance? Well, the Supreme Court, in the case of Lakshmi Dicam, reported in AIR 2012 Supreme Court, has held that even difference in signature cannot be a ground to dismiss the complaint. Well, does that leave the accused totally defenseless? It may be a circumstance, it may be a situation wherein the checkbook of a person is stolen. Someone else tries to imitate his signatures and presents the check. It is dishonored, the consequences follow. What would be the defense available to the accused? A very important thing in this regard, that when a notice of dishonor is received, the reply must be prompt and pertinent on the aspect that the signatures which are appended on the check are forged. I never issued the check. That pertinent defense must be there. Assuming that by inadvertence, by whatever reason, the reply is not given to this effect, then what defense does the accused have? Can he, as a matter of right, claim that the check should be forwarded to the forensic science laboratory for comparison of the signatures. Well, my friends, I am of the firm opinion that it cannot be allowed. But at the same time, the accused is not to be left defenseless. So what is the defense available to the accused? Well, it's a very simple procedure. The signatures of the accused are available on the account opening form. The accused has access to his own bank documents. He should file an application to the bank manager, procure a certified copy of his account opening form. That certified copy, which is certified by the banker, is admissible in evidence under the Banker's Book Evidence Act. The accused can file that account opening form on record in his defense and pray the court to compare the signatures. If there is a visible difference, the court, by virtue of sections 71, 72 and 73 of the Evidence Act, can itself conclude that prima facie the signatures on the check appear to be forged, and therefore the accused cannot be held liable for the dishonor of the check. Supposing the court is not inclined to go into that comparison, then the accused can always ask the court or request the court to summon his banker in the court for giving evidence, and in that event, the banker can come in the court and make a comparison of the signatures which are appended on the dishonored check and the account opening form, and give his opinion that there is a difference, visible difference in the signatures. Now, a question would crop up in the minds of everyone that if there was a difference in signature, why didn't the bank mark that reason in the dishonor memo? The reason is simple, that once the banker checks the status of the account and finds that the funds are insufficient, they don't go into looking out for the signatures on the account opening form. That is not required to be done. So this is regarding the difference in signatures. So my view is that no one can claim as of right that my signature should be compared through the FSL. Law is now well settled that even if the check is the payee, the drawer stops payment of the check, still he can be prosecuted. That can be a reason for dishonor of the check, and it is not a valid defense that the account was stopped. The account was closed. Even if the account is closed, then also the prosecution can be permitted. There was a big debate regarding checks given towards security, and if they were dishonored, whether the prosecution could be permitted. In a recent judgment in the case of Sampelli Satyanarayan Rao, reported in AIR 2016 Supreme Court 4363, Honorable the Supreme Court held that even if the check is given towards security and it is dishonored on presentation, the accused can be held liable for the offense under section 138 of the NI Act. There are issues regarding, there were some judgments in which it was held that a complaint cannot be entertained on the basis of a second notice under section under chapter 17 of the NI Act. Now that controversy has been laid to rest in the case of N. Parmeshwaram, which is reported in AIR 2017 Supreme Court 1681. Even a second dishonor, second time presentation can be permitted, and second notice even on the basis thereof the complaint is maintainable. Regarding territorial jurisdiction, there was a big hue and cry across the chaos in the country because of the Supreme Court decision in the case of Dashrath Roop Singh Rathod, as everyone knows, that has been laid to rest with the judgment in the case of Bridgestone Industries versus Inderpal Singh, reported in AIR 2016 volume 2 SCC page 75. Often questions are put up in the trial to the complainant that while the accused is trying to shun his responsibility on the issue of legally enforceable debt, questions are put up that, look here sir, you are talking of a cash transaction and there is no entry pertaining to this amount, the check amount, in your income tax return. Honorable Supreme Court had the occasion to consider this controversy in the case of Rohit Bhai Jivanlal's case, which is reported in AIR 2019 Supreme Court 1876. And the Supreme Court went on to hold that even if there is no entry in the income tax return, it would not matter, and mere creation of doubt on the source of funds of the holder in due course would not absolve the accused from the liability. Then in the case of that section 118 of the Negotiable Instrument Act, which I referred, this issue was considered by Honorable the Supreme Court in the case of Veer Singh Mukesh Kumar, which is reported in AIR 2019 Supreme Court 2446. Subsequent filling of unfilled check cannot be termed to be a material alteration, and prosecution is permissible even in such case. So these are broadly some of the issues which arise in the cases under the NI Act. Now I would request Vikas ji to take over the reins. Yes.
So the way you have presented, along with the trace of the history as to how this came into being, the legal aspects, certain issues, I would say large number of issues, which normally creep up in the minds of a professional, and especially one who is not doing the core specialization in the Negotiable Instrument Act. I think after this session, large doubts which invariably would have been in his mind would have been dispelled with. He would be feeling happy that a day well spent, though on a scorching day way in Rajasthan, we too have a temperature of 40 plus, but each degree does count. But here I will say the each degree of knowledge has only manifold times increased, and everybody would be too pleased. The checks and the check balances as a defense as well as for the lawyer have been nicely explained. Sometimes, like what you told, that the party comes, what should be the defense, how the defense of check has come to being. These are the certain issues which invariably would come into the mind of any lawyer. And as we say that as one grows into the profession, that bloated ego comes into the, creeps in the mind of everyone. He feels I shouldn't ask anybody. But once after the session is there, he need not ask anywhere. Just like we say, it's a one-point stop. So, and we have been pleased to know that Justice Vineet Kothari has also joined us. But
my sincere gratitude to him.
I will just unmute him because we have muted everyone. Of word of, because he was one of the facilitators for the entire this thing. Mehul Kothari.
My sincere thanks and regards to Justice Kothari, sir. He is a mentor. He is my mentor in the High Court, and I am deeply obliged to him.
Dear brother, I'm so happy. I have actually learned by this discourse. I have sent a message also to Brother Sandeep Mehta, and the session was very good. And you see, the way he teaches the subject is wonderful. I think many practicing lawyers would have got some tips out of that, definitely, because he talks of very precise points and then solutions. So that's very nice. And he was, I can share this, not a secret. He was the leading most lawyer of Rajasthan in criminal side. Actually, we had to persuade him a lot to become a judge. with a great difficulty, we retained him to keep his name on the board. Otherwise, he was slipping out kind of thing. And he's an asset to the Rajasthan High Court. We are proud of him. And wonderful discourse, Brother Sandeep Mehta. Actually, I thank on behalf of all the audiences. You and I have been benefited myself also. Thank you.
So as you rightly said,
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the sincere appreciation.
his becoming of the judge. Yes, sir. So you can continue.
I just shared whatever little knowledge I had of the topic. It's nothing special.
No, very
As Kothari Sahib is very kind with his words.
Very, very practical, very, very pointed, well researched paper also, I would say. You were referring to notes constantly and then giving citations and everything. I think very happy. All should be very happy. I think 3 rounds of cheers for Justice Mehta.
So if it had been a practical auditorium, we could have just given a standing ovation that we have learned things. It is an experience, and as you said, that his becoming a judge, we have triple benefit. Number one, once a lawyer of having good number of briefs becomes a judge, large number of lawyers, the second rank lawyers get the briefs. That is one advantage. Number two, a judge who is having a good practice becomes a judge. Then his understanding of the law is on a different level, and that too again facilitates for the better law. And then more so when he comes on a platform to explain things, then it becomes more. Like we say, sone pe suhaga ho jata, sir.
You are very good at organizing these all these webinars, and you bring on board very, very eminent and good judges and lawyers, and that credit goes to you. Very good.
No, so it's the entire endeavor is that everybody should learn in this process.
Yeah, that's.
So I will just read questions. Mr. Amarjeet Virk, he is a lawyer out in Punjab Haryana High Court. I will just unmute him. He can ask a question directly. Meanwhile, Pramod Kumar, complaint filed under section 138A on 13th day. Now the accused raised a question on materiality.
He is talking of premature complaint. The court can wait for the period to pass, and thereafter the cognizance can be taken.
Okay.
Or the complaint can be returned back to the complainant to be presented after the limitation period commences. These are the two ways out. There was a judgment of the Supreme Court. I am presently not recalling the judgment, but there is a direct judgment of the Supreme Court on this issue regarding premature complaint.
So we have unmuted Mr. Amarjeet. He's a very seasoned lawyer out here.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, sir. Good evening.
I just had one doubt about the amendment of 2018
Sir.
interim compensation.
Sir.
Though Supreme Court in Surinder Deswal's case has held that 143A is a prospective in nature,
Yes,
and 148 is retrospective in nature.
Right, sir.
But one question I have in my mind,
Sir.
whether any appeal which is filed before coming into force of the amendment,
Sir.
Section 148 can be made applicable to those appeals too.
Well, to my mind, it is a beneficial legislation because you see, Viksa, the trials under the NI Act, they take years to decide. The complainant is virtually left remediless. They check which was for a sum of rupees 1 lakh, loses its sheen after 10 years. It becomes worth not more than 10,000 rupees. So for that purpose, the amendment has been brought in. And even before this amendment was there, our courts were in a habit. This is simply an extension of that power to impose a condition while granting bail. So it is simply an alteration in the conditions of bail to my mind. So the retrospective effect would also be applied to pending appeals. Even if the appeal is filed before, to my mind, it can be applied before. Even before.
Thank you. Thank you.
So a question has been asked that what defense a sleeping partner can have in a partnership firm once the check is bounced.
So the simple defense answer is section 141 CRPC. He simply has to come forward and say that he has no role to play in the day-to-day affairs of the firm. And rather this burden is on the complainant. So sleeping partner, unless the complainant proves that the particular partner who is being arraigned in the complaint has any responsibility towards the day-to-day affairs of the firm, he would not be liable to be prosecuted.
Mr. Hemant Gupta, if accused company does not accept notice and it is returned back to the counsel for the complainant, it remarks premises found locked. What will be the fate of the complaint, as complainant can't do anything except sending at the correct address? That is the last known address.
It is only sending on the correct address. That is the duty of the upon the complainant. He has forwarded the notice. The doors are locked. That will be presumed to be served. The notice will be presumed to be served.
So another question is, what is the criteria that the judicial magistrate does while issuing summons? Since most of the magistrates do not pass a reasoned order, and what could be the defense thereafter?
Basically, at the time of issuance of summons, a reasoned order is not called for. All that is to be written, mentioned in the order or recorded in the order is that there is a prima facie ground for proceeding against the accused. So that is a reason enough. There is no reason, there is no call for the magistrate to pass a detailed order. Summoning order need not be a very lengthy or a reasoned order. It is simply a formal order which the magistrate has to pass. That is why the summary procedure is applied, sir.
Thank you, sir. Sunil Kumar, is it necessary to plead in regards to appeal against judgment to accused who is convicted for another case?
I didn't get the question.
So I will repeat it. He says, is it necessary to plead in the complaint regarding the filling up of the check in the case of a blank check?
Not necessary, not necessary. That right is given to the complainant by virtue of section 118. It is not at all necessary.
So Mr. Pramod Kumar wants to ask a question directly. We have unmuted him.
Yeah.
Mr. Pramod? Fauza Sheikh, how to serve notice in regard to appeals against judgment to accused who is convicted in another case?
How to?
How to serve a person who is convicted in another case, meaning thereby he's in behind the bars.
Sir, the process should be sent to jail and the court can summon the accused through a production warrant. The process will be sent wherever he is lost. That's all. Nothing beyond that.
The employee of a private limited company had stolen a check on his removal from the company and filed a case under Negotiable Instrument Act. How to come out of it?
I didn't get the whole question. There was a break in the link.
So he says, let's assume an employee steals a check from his company and then he tries to proceed under the Negotiable Instrument Act.
So then the defense is to establish that there is no legally enforceable debt. That is that presumption has to be rebutted by leading evidence.
No cognizance has been taken against an accused in a false complaint from last. What is the remedy for last 15 years? What is the remedy for the accused?
No cognizance has been taken.
Yes.
Cognizance is never taken against the accused. Cognizance is taken of the offense. The accused is summoned.
All right, sir. And Mr. Anand, he wanted to unmute him, get himself unmuted and ask the question directly. We have unmuted Mr. Anand. Mr. Anand?
Yes.
Mr. Pramod Kumar.
Not getting his.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes,
Yes.
please.
Sir, good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
Sir, my question is basically I filed my complaint prematured. That was on 13th day.
So there are two.
Sir, please, there is another issue also.
Yes.
The accused came to the court. He said to the court that yes, I have taken the money. I am ready to pay the money. And he filed his wakalatnama and proceeding went on. On the next date of hearing, he eloped, and thereafter the proceeding of 182 went on. 82 went on. FIR was registered. After 3-4 years, he was arrested. He was brought to the court and was sent to the jail.
Yes.
Thereafter, he was enlarged on bail. And then he came to the court after 4-5 years of gap that this case was filed prematured. And since he raised a question of mentability.
There is just give me a moment. There is a direct judgment of the Supreme Court. Some Yogendra or Yogendra Pratap Singh. You got to read that judgment. I think you will get your answer to this issue. Okay.
Yogendra Pratap Singh.
Read that judgment. Yes, Yogendra Pratap Singh. It is 2014 Supreme Court.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Well, when the check only with the amount and no date was given by the accused to discharge its liability in 2014, on instruction of the accused, date is incorporated by the complainant in 2019, and check is bounced. Will the check be maintainable? What is?
No, there is some dispute regarding this, because if the check is presented beyond the period, if the amount is admittedly due beyond the period of recovery suit, then there is a strong defense available to the accused that there is no enforceable liability, because the period for recovery has gone by. Recovery in a civil suit has passed by. That is a valid defense to my mind. There is a judgment to this effect. Off the cuff, I am not remembering it. But if the check is presented beyond the period, the date, supposing the check was given 6 years back, it was a blank check, it was not having any date, the holder appends the date, as you are saying, on the instruction of the accused. But still, the period for enforcing civil liability for the amount has passed by. So it will be a valid defense for the accused to say that this I never gave the instructions, and that the period for recovery in a civil suit has also lapsed by virtue of the limitation provided in the Limitation Act. So the check cannot be enforced.
Can Section 82 be invoked of the CRPC under the Negotiable Instrument Act?
Of course, if the accused absconds, it can very well be done.
Right, sir. So we have unmuted Mr. Anand, who wants to ask a question directly. Mr. Anand?
I think Vikasji, even our question hour has come to an end.
Yes, sir. It was
endless discussion.
No, that's true. Be that as it may, sir. Once the session was quite enriching, I'm just finding that large number of the participants invariably are asking the questions on which their mind is boggling as to how to proceed ahead and how to give an advice. And once the advice from a person like you were coming, so they thought this is the best way and best platform. No, I understand and I appreciate that issues have been dealt with, but ultimately we all have to draw a line to proceed for the further this thing. So we are again, the gratitude cannot be explained in the manner in which you have explained everything. It has been a session which will always be embedded in the minds of the participants as well as, so we are also live on the Facebook, and people can also, in case they have missed any of the webinars, including the present one, they can just log into the Beyond Law CLC YouTube channel. They can see what all videos are there, including the present one. So I will request Mr. Amarjeet Virk, who is like an elder brother, to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of Beyond Law CLC. And especially the Beyond Law CLC team is also indebted to Justice Vineet Kothari, who had proposed your name, that you can have the insights and outsides of all this entire thing. And thank you to Justice Vineet Kothari, who it only shows his humbleness that despite the fact that he's himself a knowledgeable person, it shows that his coming on the platform, that even whatever level you have grown in the knowledge can always be learned and you can always improve. And as they say that the ladder to success is that you every day have to climb one step to improve. Thank you, Justice Vineet Kothari. And over to Mr. Amarjeet Virk, a very senior counsel and a very, he's just like my elder brother in the practicing in the High Court. I'm just unmuting him. Mr. Amarjeet Virk. So, yes, Mr. Virk.
Yes. First of all, I'll congratulate Mr. Vikas that you are providing this opportunity to our lawyer fraternity in this lockdown period, that they are being made familiar with this webinar. And now I thank you, Dr. Justice Sandeep Mehta, for this knowledgeable lecture, Your Lordship. It is very interesting that the people and the advocates who are practicing in different parts of the country and in the trial court especially, that they have come to this knowledge that what do have to do, take care while filing the complaints and dealing the trial. Though in the high courts also during appeal, we have to be very careful, but it is very beneficial for the advocates who are practicing in the trial court. Thank you, Lordship. Thank you very much.
So thank you, everyone, and thank you to the entire participants.
Thank you all for listening to me patiently. Thank you. Thank you, Vikasji.
No, sir, it's a wonderful pleasure. The most interesting part of the today's session was that it was short and crisp, because we all know that even a lecture beyond a 45 minutes or 1 hour invariably does not hold good. But we just had all those topics covered in a very nice presentation. Thank you, everyone. Stay blessed. And tomorrow we have a session with Justice Anant Venkatesh. He's a sitting judge of the Madras High Court. The Contemporary Trends, March of Law. Those who actually want to see what have been the changes in the law of the recent times, it's a request on behalf of Beyond Law CLC. They should join to see how the law has evolved with the advent of time. As they say, everything is constant except for change, which continuously changes. Everything is stagnant except for change, and change is we should see in the law. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, sir.